have CB Anderson joining me now. CB was the longtime gardener for the PBS television series, The Victory Garden. Hundreds of his poems have appeared in scores of print and electronic journals out of North America, Great Britain, Ireland, Austria, Australia, and India, quite a list. And his collection, Mortal Soup and the Blue Yonder, was published in 2013 by White Violet Press. So, CB, thanks for being on.
It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. CB, I know your friends call you Kip. I don't know if I'm allowed to call you Kip.
No one else has called me anything but that. No one that I know has ever called me that in my whole life. So.
Well, then that makes me more comfortable. I was watching YouTube. I was watching a few episodes of The Victory Garden, and I was looking for you there. I don't know if I was watching the wrong episodes or what. I didn't see you, but I was just curious about your role in that show. How did you get into gardening?
Well, a long time ago, when I lived in Brooklyn, New York, my friend bought a house from a contractor, and the whole backyard was paved in concrete, so he had a place to park his trucks. And so one summer he said, I want to have garden space. So we hired somebody to tear up all the concrete, and then using the soil below that, we built a garden. So I started gardening there in Brooklyn. Then a few years later, some friends of mine from college bought a place in the mountains in Arizona along a river there, but here would be, we could probably call it a stream. And they wanted me to, help them set up a garden. That's what I did for 3 years. Then, moving back east about after those 3 years were over, with a stay in Albuquerque in between, through some other college friends of mine, it was suggested that I apply for an opening for a gardener at the Victory Garden. And I did so. Apparently, there were only 2 applicants for it. They didn't want to interview a lot of people, so the word was not spread around very much. Anyway, I got that job. And then the next 15 years at that location in Lexington, Massachusetts, basically mastered the craft of growing vegetables. Soon that became kind of rote and, a little bit boring maybe. Although it was nice to get paid a handsome salary to grow my own food. But I, pretty quickly got more interested in ornamentals. And that's, been a process. The show continued on for another 5 or 7 years and at a different location until the underwriting failed and then the show kind of went away. So if you didn't see me on the episodes you watched, it might be that you had the earlier ones because the show was already about 15 years old before I joined it. But I was only put on camera when we got a new director at the latter part of its existence. If it were shows before that, you would not have seen me.
When it ended, did you find yourself asking, what am I going to do with myself now?
Well, I did, but mainly I needed some jobs. So I got a job at the garden concierge service for a local nursery. So I would go out, and take care of other people's gardens. And I still do that now, freelance though.
On pbs.org, I did find a Kip's maintenance blog that I was reading, in which you kind of write your thoughts on all manner of things, growing fruit, pruning, ducking, geesing, and the website even features some of your poetry there related to the more horticultural themes.
That's about 20 years ago. And that was around the time I started writing poetry.
I think you might be the most prolific poet I've had on so far. I know like Susan Jarvis Bryant and James Twitty, they've written a lot of stuff. A lot of the older poets have, but I think you might take the cake, and it's all the more surprising because I do seem to recall reading, as you maybe just alluded to, that you haven't been doing the poetry thing for as long as some others.
No, I mean, as far as Susan and James go, they probably started later than I did, or at least it seems that way to me, judging by when I first became aware of them. And it's just a matter of time. As of right now, I'm approaching 1,000 appearances in various journals.
Yeah, that is an awful lot. Because I was going to ask you about that too, whether you're approaching the 1,000 mark, because I have one of your books here, Roots in the Sky, Boots on the Ground, and in the back of that you say you have like 700 poems published, and that was maybe like 5 years ago. What led you to get into poetry at all? Was it just like a compulsion that you woke up one day and said you had to start writing?
Not exactly, and I can tell you exactly what it is. A friend of mine from college decided that I should be reading more liberal commentary. So he gave me a subscription to the New Republic. And like many political or literary magazines, there's always a few poems in every issue. When I got this issue, which is June 9th, 2003, my family was away in New Mexico visiting relatives. So I was home alone, and I read the two poems in this issue. And if I could, I'd like to read the important one.
Sure thing.
It's by Don Patterson. I don't know if you're aware of him. He's a Scottish
I'm familiar
poet.
with him, yes.
And this poem is called A Gift. That night she called his name, not mine, and could not call it back. I shamed myself and thought of that blind girl in Kodiak, who sat out on the stoop each night to watch the daylight fade and lift her child down to the gate cut in the palisade. And what old caution love resigned when through that misty stare she passed the boy to not her bare-skinned husband, but the bear. So I read that. I said, whoa, this is really worth doing. I better start. So, the beginning then, I started spending all of my time writing poems. And I was probably finishing a dozen or so poems every month. And of course, my pace right now is nothing like that. Yeah, and, haven't really looked back since. I guess I'm looking back now, thinking about it.
So, other than Patterson, do you have any other influences, whether they're more recent or whether more historical influences?
Well, probably the poet I most admire is Richard Wilbur, because just about everything he writes is perfect. I can't say he's influenced me much because I don't think I've written any perfect poems in the way that he can. But some of his stuff is just so good. So I hold him up as an ideal, but I do not find myself really capable of imitating him very well. I don't know if do you want to hear one of his poems?
Sure.
This was written rather late in his life. I read it in the New Yorker for the first time, probably about 15 years ago, but it's since been not anthologized, but put in his second complete works volume, published, I think, around 2006. And it's called Blackberries for Amelia. Fringing the woods, the stone walls and the lanes, old thickets everywhere have come alive, their new leaves reaching out in fans of 5 from tangles overarched by this year's canes. They have their flowers, too, it being June, and here or there in brambled dark and light are small 5-petaled blooms of chalky white, as random clustered and as loosely strewn as the far stars, of which we now are told that ever faster do they bolt away, and that a night may come in which, some say, we shall have only blackness to behold. I have no time for any change so great, but I shall see the August weather spur berries to ripen where the flowers were, dark berries, savage sweet and worth the wait, and there will come the moment to be quick and save some from the birds, and I shall need 2 pails, old clothes in which to stain and bleed, and a grandchild to talk with while we pick.
That is lovely. Thank you for that. And it has
Oh,
a horticultural theme too, something you can relate to more than most, I imagine.
yeah, it's that, but also I like the way he links the cosmic about the stars, bolting away in the universe, growing dark, with time spent with his granddaughter.
Kind of like linking the sublime, cosmic aspects with the small scale stuff. That's nice. I have read, quite a few of his poems, but I'm also I'm more familiar even with his translations of Moliere, which I've read. I think all of his translations are universally regarded as being the best.
It's a friend of mine, my neighbor actually, once said, who's an English professor. He said he gets all the jokes are in the right place when you translate something. He also did a translation of Canto 25 of the Inferno.
Really? Just Canto 25?
I think so. And that was enough. It's hard because everything is perfectly rhymed and in metrical and everything.
I'll have to check that one out. I want to talk about your methods of prosody. One thing that you're particularly known for, it seems, is your really unique rhymes. Is there a secret there? Do you maintain a list of unusual words in your head everywhere you go, or is it all kind of inspiration?
The words are usually in my vocabulary. Occasionally, I'll cheat and look at a rhyming dictionary to find
Mm,
some strange words, probably not used for 100 years, even in Great Britain. But there are no secrets because every instance of rhyme is right there for anybody to see if they want to. But I think ideally, if you can do it, if you can make your rhymes both surprising and make them seem inevitable at the same time, I mean, you've done it.
that's a good way of putting it. Surprising yet inevitable.
The opposite of forced, I guess, would be the old,
Did
breeze and trees.
yeah, breeze and trees.
Actually, Robert Frost used that rhyme once very well in one of his poems, as was pointed out to me.
Yeah, I guess if you can, if your line can build up to that in,
Yeah.
in, like you said, a surprised and intelligent way, then yeah, if you make it seem not cliche. As far as some of your own poetry, did you have any that you would like to share with us? I know it's a lot to choose from with among your 1,000 poems, just choosing like a couple.
Yeah, I know, because I looked here and I kind of liked a lot of my old poems. I wish I could write them again, in a sense. But I've chosen one from the book that you just showed, which is my second book, right? It was Roots in the Sky. You showed
Yeah.
me?
Is that your
Yeah.
second one? Okay, so it's Blue
Yeah.
Yonder and then this one.
Yeah. This one is called Escrow. And I originally wrote this to send to Paul Christian Stevens, who was then editing what he referred to as a broadsheet called The Flea, which harks back to a publication, I don't know, a century or two ago, I guess. But anyway, after I'd written this, he passed away. I don't know, do you know who Paul Christian Stevens is?
No, I haven't heard of him.
Well, he's an Australian who ended up being pretty influential here in this hemisphere because he started some publications that, well, I don't know, had some notoriety, I guess. He started
Okay.
Shit Creek Review and the Chimera, and then finally he had The Flea. And that was his last thing. So there is an epigraph here referring to that I was expecting him to go on editing The Flea. And this was published in Angle, which was an online journal out of Great Britain, probably 7 to 10 years ago. I think they had 3 issues and they just got tired of doing it, I guess. But anyway, Escrow. I often dwell on persons now beyond me, whose absence is uncompensated loss. And Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani approximates my feelings for the boss who lives on high. Though I am not a Jew, my dearest friends are Jewish. Some are still alive and well. But what am I to do about my fellow Christians who think ill of me because I haven't walked the straight and narrow? Maybe nothing. Let us see what comes of unacknowledged, latent hate, and who strides dry upon the Galilee when storms arise. My protest has gone far enough, and now it's time to pour a drink and breathe the incense from a good cigar, to carve a quiet space where one may think about the past and future. Buried friends are welcome to attend, and so they shall, to castigate me or to make amends from highest heaven or the depths of hell.
Like that. When you think of the term a metaphysical poem, like the kind that John Donne or whatever used to write, if you don't know anything about that, you think, oh, it's very abstruse or something, it's metaphysical, which I think for the most part that's not really true at all. It's just about what the conceits, right? The kind of elaborate
Yes,
imagery.
and wit. And Samuel Johnson really did not like it very much. He was much more approving of the Augustine poetry, and I'm not even sure what that is.
Like Pope, like Alexander Pope and stuff, and Swift,
Yeah,
I
probably.
think. Do you know why that is? Why he didn't like that? I know he's kind of very moralizing, like he criticized Shakespeare for essentially limning the bad characters in a very realistic way, I seem to recall.
It sounds about right, with just the way he went about things. But metaphysical poems can be about theology, but they don't have to be. I mean, one of Don's most famous poems is probably called The Flea. That is how Paul Christian Stevens' broadsheet got its name.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. But you're keeping that tradition alive and well with the conceits and the wit here, and I see that in this poem.
I'm interested in, metaphysics as well.
So over the course of what? It's been 20 years now you've been writing poetry, something like that? Can you maybe explain your development as to, is the early work different in manner or style or theme, or have you shifted your focus at all over the course of that time?
It's hard to say. Probably an objective viewpoint would be, rather than my own, would be better able to tell. It's like I don't know what I'm doing. I just write things down.
That's what Socrates said about, a lot of artists. They're just vehicles for the muse or whatever you want to call it. And often they don't understand why they do things or can explain it very well. Well, I'm sure it'll be the subject for an interesting scholarly study someday, perhaps.
I I need a literary executor.
Do you have one lined up?
Not
You
really.
got any of your kids? Any of your kids, you must have like stuff lying around that's been unpublished. I mean, I know like what, you've got
Oh
a
God,
thousand poems and
I've got
only two
stacks.
books.
I've got stacks. I've got enough for just published stuff for
Mm.
another 5 books probably.
Any plans on bringing anything else out? Do you have anything on the horizon there?
No, what I have on the horizon is I've got. Let me see if I can show you. I've got like this, this big stack of poems that I started and never finished that I need to get to. So, I mean, I have no plans. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to get a book published, really. I mean, I went to Kelsey Books twice already, and I don't know how they make money, really, and I don't know what they want another one or not.
Formal poetry a bit out of favor. Like I know this guy who he wrote more of a narrative poem, but it's more like a young adult thing. But he was shopping around his book and he gave it to like, I don't know, it must have been like 50, 60. He sent it to a lot of places and almost all of them said, we're not interested in publishing poetry that rhymes.
Do you know who Louis Turco is, by the way?
No.
Well, he's a poet and a critic, and he
Mm.
writes free verse and he writes formal verse. When he writes
Okay.
formal verse, he rearranges the letters in his name so his byline is Wesley Court. He has this whole theory about free verse. Now, I can remember back in the day reading something probably in the New Yorker or in the poetry magazine, and reading that, I'm saying, this is not poetry. And he straightened me out on that. Here's his idea, basically.
Okay.
There are two modes of writing. There's measured writing, which we call verse, and there's unmeasured writing, which we call prose. Poetry, however, is not a mode of writing, it's a genre of writing. And you can use the modes of writing, either mode, to write it. And his example of unmeasured poetry is like most of Whitman, the King James Bible, and of course, everything that they call free verse these days. So he says there's nothing wrong with it. I think the problem with most free verse is that it's not that it's prose, it's that it's bad prose. There are some exceptions, like Louise Gluck, for instance, who I just discovered when I looked up to see if she had an umlaut in her last name, which she does, that she just won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, which is neither here nor there, really. But then I remember reading something by Claudia Emerson. It was also really nice prose poetry. That's what Turco says about free verse. It's just a kind of prose poetry.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way about that. Like, I'm not opposed to free verse on principle, but most of the stuff you see is bad. They're just not good writers, whether you look at it in any way.
Some of it's worse than others. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think of Robert Herrick. He's like a 17th century poet, one of the sons of Ben, like a follower of Ben Jonson. But his collection of poetry, Hesperides, it's got like 1,400 poems in it. It's just a collection of most of what he wrote, if not everything he wrote. So I think that's the largest collection by a classic poet. But someone's gonna have to take care of that for you. It seems like if you're not gonna do it yourself, then
Well,
I guess you do need a literary executor.
There's still hope for my grandchildren, and maybe I can
Right.
get to them if I live long enough.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope. So you did mention Richard Wilbur. Now, I actually read something. I read that you almost studied with Richard Wilbur, or you did study with him. Or is that true? Is there a personal connection there with Richard Wilbur?
No, when I matriculated at Wesleyan University in 1967, he was in the faculty of the English department, and I could have taken courses with him. Of course, at that time, I was 30 years away from starting what I'm doing now. I had no idea that I would regret not having done that at the time. But there he was. One of my roommates actually took a course from him. It would have been a nice thing.
Did your roommate have any stories about that, or did he ever share with you any wisdom about that?
He just showed me the poems. I think every week he had to turn in a poem, and then he would print them out, so everyone could see what everybody else was doing. I mean, a lot of people have stories of him. They talk about what a great tennis player he was. The killer instinct.
As far as new and upcoming poets today, do you have any advice for them? Whether that's advice on, what they should be reading or anything else, more practical advice, how to navigate this world.
Well, read as much as you can. Unfortunately, today, well, actually, 10 to 15 years ago, there was a lot more venues for formal poetry around, and some of them are very good, and they all seem to go away, and they go away faster than they're being replaced. I should say that, as far as I can tell.
Why is that? Are the older poets who are doing it just dying?
It's all a matter of the editor, because the editors would accept new poets if they wrote something they liked. But people get tired of doing it. I mean, it's a lot of work.
It is a ton of work, yeah. I feel bad for Evan.
He's now printing more poems per week than he ever did. He's taking on more and more work, as far as I can tell. And God knows how much stuff passes through his screen.
Well, hopefully for all our sakes, he can keep up with it.
It's only around 4 places that I regularly submit to anymore. If you look in the acknowledgments section of the book, you'll see a whole list of places. So, I mean, there were a lot of good places to submit to.
But you only submit to 4 now.
The society keeps me busy enough because of the turnover rate. And then there's Trinacria, which is Salemi's magazine when he's publishing it. I think he's a couple of years in arrears now in terms of the dates, because the next one that comes out will probably be spring, 2015 or something like that. So he's a little behind. And then occasionally I submit to Snakeskin, which is a British publication. Oh, and Blue Unicorn, that's a venue. They'll publish all kinds of poetry, but it's a good place for formal poetry, though.
What you mentioned about the disappearing formal journals, I think the poet Randall Bird keeps like a list of these, and I think there are maybe like 60 or so on his list.
Rose Kelleher used to have a list called Venues for Formal Poetry, and I guess she got tired of keeping it up, so she took it down. But that was a place, and there's always new things popping up. She differentiated between formal only and formal friendly. I mean, if you send something to Joe Salemi, it's got to be formal, and Evan too, I would say.
Yeah.
But there are other places where they're not going to write to you and say we don't like rhyme, but they publish other than formal poetry. And then there's like the little niche things like the First Things, which is a Catholic. Mostly it's like essays and things about religion and social life and stuff like that. But they have a poetry section, and they've had it a long time. It's good if you can get into there. The Anglican Theological Review also has a poetry section, as do, I'm sure, a lot of more highbrow journals. Although some of these high-end places, your stuff's got to be pretty exceptional.
I would imagine it does come down to maybe who you are as a person, too. Like, this is especially the case in the more liberal journals. It has a lot to do with your credentials and stuff, too.
And I don't know, because, I don't go there.
Yeah, right. I mean, I only haunt them so that basically for the purpose of this show, so I can make fun of them because they're stupid.
Right. Not too long ago, Poetry Magazine, almost every issue would have at least one formal poem, because their editor then, Christian Wyman, he wrote formal poetry and he liked it. And there's some good stuff in it. And the previous editor of The New Yorker was also that way. A lot of Wilbur's stuff was published there, probably because he got paid more to publish there than anywhere else. But now they've changed editors, and I haven't even bothered to stop at the library to read poetry in years, because the last time I did, it's just so bad. And supposedly they're the magazine of record.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I read a good poem in The New Yorker, and I kind of like it. I do glance at that occasionally.
For a few years, my neighbors would give me his old copies. And if I found something good, I would clip it out, and I have a folder full of formal poetry from The New Yorker. Writers like Clive James, Richard Wilbur, and even John Updike. He actually wrote some good poetry. Some would say he's a better critic than poet, but he had some good stuff.
Okay. Was there anything you wanted to add, or were there any closing remarks that you had, Kip?
Not really.
I do appreciate you coming on here. It was great having you. We'll be looking for the massive collection of 1,000+ poems, your magnum opus, to come out sometime.
I'll talk to my granddaughter about it in a couple of years.
Well, all right then. Kip, thanks for coming on, and I'd have to have you back on sometime. So that was me talking with C.B. Anderson, and that's all I have for you for today with this episode. Next time, I will be delving into the topic of Renaissance poetry and talking about not only one of the greatest Renaissance poets, but I think one of the greatest poets of all time, and that is Torquato Tasso. So stay tuned for that. And while you're waiting for that, if you want to show up in force at the headquarters of the National Endowment for the Arts and bring protest signs, do a lot of yelling and shouting about the wastefulness of funding garbage art. Then you'd help to really raise awareness about this issue. So until next time, be formal, stay classy, and I'll see you then.